We'll go.
How are you?
I'm doing well. This will be the fastest Insta Live thing ever. It'll be the race against Luis's battery.
I should have known better. But I have 22%, so I'm good. But happy holidays.
Likewise. Yeah, it's. I'm here in the mission office. I've been on the sales floor all day. I got my gear on, just
Nice.
cranking through the holiday line in Sherman Oaks, and helping people just getting last minute presents done. So it's been really good.
I mean, I think everybody needs a lot of things to drink during these holiday seasons. So.
Yeah, and we're it's what's good is that there's been a lot of El Tesoro moving out of the door, and I've been sort of all pumped up about our conversation today. So I've been expressing those that anticipation through the sale of El Tesoro bottles. So thanks for doing this.
No, that's great. We're getting a lot of mentions in like press and media about this year we received the agave producer of the year, which I thought it was a tequila producer of the year, but Carlos corrected me on one of these Instagram lives. Like, actually, it's agave producer of the year.
That's awesome.
But, yeah.
Well, congratulations. You guys deserve it. As you know, it's been interesting when I get asked for advice on the floor. Usually I'm in the offices or I'm doing marketing stuff, but I've been working the floor a lot during the holidays to help out. And I get asked about tequila. It's a very different set from my old employer, where we were very, very careful. And here you've got like 1,000 tequilas. And of those 1,000 tequilas, maybe like 30 of them are made with, ovens, Tahona roller, and real agave.
Yeah, and I think it's crazy. I mean, the tequila industry is just like, skyrocketing. It just keeps getting more and more, popular. And you see it, I think, now, especially during the pandemic, we've seen a huge increase in consumption of tequila. So I think people are starting to maybe rediscover it again. Maybe they're just, whatever it is, I just think agave spirits are just amazing. And people, also there's this perception about tequila being, better for you, where it's
right.
no alcohol. But I prefer tequila because I know how it, number one, I love the flavor of it, and I'm just agave lover, and tequila, and mezcal, and all that. But I just think it does better to me as well, like my body. I feel, especially when we're with all those different brands, I think, to my personal body, I think the best tequilas for me are, those that are producing those traditional methods, because I know exactly what I'm putting in, so I think it's crazy. You said you have 1,000 brands, 1,000 different brands.
I'm gonna say all of the things that I know you have been told not to say, so that you don't have to say them. So I'll just say them, and then you can jump in and just sort of talk around them. I'm gonna help you out today. It's the great joke, as we all know in the industry, is when people talk about that very thing, health. And I like tequila because I don't like sugar, and I just want tequila and soda with a squeeze of lime. So I want something on the rocks, and then we all just sort of look at each other, because we know that the tequila they're ordering on the rocks is loaded with glycerol and God knows what else. It's probably the sweetest possible tequila, and it's not sugar free. And it's not passing through their bodies without sugar, because a lot of tequila has additives in it, like glycerol and extra sugar, caramel, what else? Can you tell me exactly how El Tesoro is made, so that people that are watching know how a traditional tequila should be made?
Yeah, and so along with that, I think just legally it's allowed to add things to tequila,
right.
I think a percentage, 1% of flavoring additives that you can add to it. For us at Tesoro, we're part of a small group of tequilas that are really out of those 3,000 current brands that we know of, that maybe there's even more currently, because every day I feel like there's a new athlete or celebrity, which is fine, coming out with a new tequila. But there's about 10 brands, 7 to 10 brands that are keeping to the old school traditional methods. What does that mean? An old school traditional tequila starts with the agaves. We have 100% estate-grown agave. That means that all of our agaves are coming from the family estates, so they have control over the raw material. So, like with anything, whether it's food, when you have a high-quality raw ingredient, you're going to have hopefully you'll have a final product that's also super high quality. But for us, it's all starts with the agave. when you go into, like, tequila can be broken down in 5 steps, essentially. Harvest, cooking, extraction, fermentation, and distillation. So those are the 5 steps of tequila, but everybody does it a little bit differently, and some people cut corners, some people, like, accelerate certain things. For us, we are the most inefficient that you could possibly think of, and it's not, cost efficient either. It's pretty expensive to produce a really high quality tequila because, there's a lot of effort and labor going in, and not as much coming out. So apart from that, so we use traditional ovens before the like a mezcal. Tequila is a mezcal, but not mezcal tequila. It was cooked underground and like roasting like in pits, like barbacoa, if you've ever had that kind of meat or whatever, or suckling pig. But now we use steam ovens, so that's one way that, the difference between some of them that are not industrial. We could talk about that too. I mean, we could stop there. So Tesoro uses traditional stone oven. What does that mean? We load all of our raw agaves into these big stone ovens that maybe can hold 5 tons of agave. It's just like a huge oven. Close the door, and then we steam bake them. So it's not, people will say it's smoky, and that's just natural flavoring from the tequila. But we steam it for about 48 hours, essentially. We cook it, so it's all steam baked and starts from like this vapor from the bottom, just comes up to the top, starts heating it, and essentially it takes about 2 days to fully cook the agaves. Agaves are full of starch. It's a starchy material, so we want to convert those starches into sugar, and that's by the Maillard reaction, obviously, caramelizing, essentially, not caramelizing, but just making it into sugars. That's how we convert those sugars. So that's one of the methods that we use. Through time, there's been more industrial, more technology that's been introduced. And for example, they introduced an autoclave. So traditional ovens steam bake from the bottom. Essentially, it's a little longer process. An autoclave is usually like a cylindrical tube or a cylindrical oven that is made out of stainless steel. And it's more like a steam pressure cooker.
Well, hold on. Can I cut you off real fast? You're just talking about people using autoclaves. You're not saying that you have an autoclave at El Tesoro.
No.
Correct. I just want to make sure everybody catches the difference.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Right.
No, I'm just gonna kind of stop. But we use traditional stone ovens. The way we extract the sugars from the cooked agaves after they cook for about 2 days, typically 72 hours, because we let them about cool for a full day. Then we use a tahona. A tahona is a big volcanic stone wheel. Imagine this, but like life size, like it's maybe 1.5 of me. That slowly presses all the cooked juices or the honey of the cooked agave, extracting that sugar by slowly pressing it. Think about it like the first or second press of a wine, or also like using a molcajete, like when you're grinding like spices or whatever into like stone on stone. It's a slow process, very inefficient, but it's adding a lot of flavor as well.
Right.
And that method also actually produces a lot less methanol, which is the alcohol that we don't want to have a lot of in any spirit. And then from there we do open air natural fermentation, which is very traditional to El Tesoro, using open air natural yeast, so nothing is added, 100% natural. And then we distill using the small copper pot stills, which is have been there for over, like the original ones have been there for about 80 years. The first 2,
right.
We now have 6 pot stills, all copper, but they're very small. So that's El Tesoro. But I went into too many other.
No. It's perfect because, and you brought up wine, which is really important because this should be exactly like wine. You have a product that is ripe. The ripe product is pressed or crushed. In the case of agave, you have to cook it as well.
Right.
You press it, you get sugar out of it, you ferment sugar, and you make your alcohol. And then in the case of tequila, you have the extra step where you distill it. It's very simple.
Yeah.
And yet, what are all the corners that are being cut? I think it starts with the fact that, like, when we had the whiskey shortage, people were talking about we don't have enough whiskey that's mature, right? Because we need to put it into a barrel. We need to wait for it to get to the level where it's ready to be drunk, and then we can drink it. And when the whiskey shortage happened, we were losing age statements, like numbers were coming off of bottles because there wasn't any 7-year-old or any 10-year-old available, so they just took the number off. You were probably drinking 4-year-old, 5-year-old whiskeys instead of 7 or 10. With agave, people tend to not understand that the agave has to go through the same 7-year cycle more or less. You got to leave it in the ground. So let's talk about. Can you explain to me what are some of the shortcuts that people are taking in the tequila industry so that they don't have to wait for their agaves to reach ripeness?
Yeah, it's funny because Carlos Cameron, our master soul, will always talk about this. Is like, we have been waiting for about, our agaves are essentially aging in the fields for 7 to 10 years, essentially. So we're waiting 7 to 10 years before we even start any of the processing to make tequila. So it even the cutting of corner starts with the agave, essentially, because depending on what method that you use, you can actually start using younger agaves, which I think, in my opinion, it's not a good thing, essentially, but one of the corners that people will use, if they're using more industrial methods, is that they will cut the agave or harvest the agave at a very young age. I've heard of some companies using 3-year-old, 4-year-old agaves, and they can actually use a very young agaves because of the method that they're extracting the sugar is way more efficient. But that's one of the shortcuts, starting from the agaves. We at Tesoro, we wait for 7 to 10 years more traditional. We let them fully ripen on the field, and then we harvest them. So that's one. But also, like, the way you cut the agave too, as well, like how you shave off the leaf of the agave, also can be a shortcut because you can add a little bit extra of the leaf, which is like they call it a quema larga, or like a long harvest, which they add a little bit more of the green part of the leaf. The one reason why it might not be such a good thing is because that green part is like a waxy part of the plant, so it adds a lot more bitterness to the final flavor of the tequila. So,
right.
You want to have like a balance of that, and that's what Carlos will always say. You want a little bit of it, but not too much. So it's an art form as well. From there, the other step that people cut corners is in the cooking. So, cooking, we use traditional stone ovens, like we said, and that takes about 20 to 38 hours to fully cook. We go for about, I believe, it's 46 at a Tesoro. We cook it at a little bit of lower temperature, and we let cool another 12 to 24 hours depending on the weather. But some people would use a way to cut a corner is like the cooking method using like those autoclaves that we talked about. So an autoclave is using not only steam but also like pressure to cook it, like a steam pressure, which cuts down the cooking from from like 30 hours to 46 hours. It cuts it way down to anywhere between 12 and 24 hours. So the issue with that can be done very well, but one of the main issues that can sometimes come about from using autoclaves is that it's using pressure, so you can't really stop the cooking essentially because you're using pressure. If you stop it, it's just like stop the whole process. But essentially, when you cook the agaves in those, it starts kind of caramelizing a little bit more, and it's hard to control the temperatures essentially and how much it actually cooks. And sugar reacts differently than caramel does. So sometimes it can burn the agaves a little bit more. So that's another method of that they can actually cut corners. Doesn't mean that it's a bad product or it's lesser quality. It's a little bit more difficult to actually produce a better quality tequila.
Well, because it's about capturing alcohol. It's not about flavor, right? I like the analogy that I give people when I'm in the store is I said, imagine if you took a bunch of shitty vegetables out of the ground that weren't ripe and then you boiled them as fast as possible so that you could ingest them. And they're like, that's disgusting. I'm like, I know, but it will keep you, it will put nutrients into your body. Like, you will not perish off this earth from hunger if you eat, unripe vegetables that have been boiled as fast as possible. It's just that they don't taste very good.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what you're talking about. You're taking unripe agaves out of the ground and cooking them in a process that's meant purely to get as much alcohol out of them as possible, not to not to enhance your flavor. Excuse me, I got all excited and yanked my own cord. I was getting too emotionally wound up there. Anyways, all right, so let's keep going. So we know that we can cut corners by harvesting young and by cooking with autoclaves. What are other ways we can cut corners?
So the other ways so the extraction. So once we cook the agave, we have all this alamiel or the sugar from the actual plant. If you've ever, I'm sure, we've been together in Mexico, so we've tasted it. So the plant is super fibrous, and those starches get converted to sugars, and you can literally eat the sugar off of the fibers of the plant. It's delicious. So to extract those sugar is using the most traditional method. Well, there's even one more where they use hand mallets, but we use the stone wheel. So the tahona is a very inefficient method of extracting the juice. It's like a big stone wheel crushing the agaves, extracting the sugar. That method maybe extracts about like 60 to 70% of all the sugars of the agave. So it's not efficient as extracting the juices. There's more efficient methods like using a roller mill. A roller mill, again, not that it's a bad process or a bad step. It's just a more efficient process where we're using a sets of round knives like they use for like sugar cane or even like wheat to extract. They run it through all these sharp knives and extract as much sugar a few times. What Carlos has mentioned before in the past is that using that method can sometimes break some of the fibers of the agave, sometimes producing more methanol in the final step. So when you use a tahona, it produces sometimes less methanol because it's slowly pressing the fibers of the agave. So that's one of the benefits of using that, and also, one of the more efficient is using the roller mill. So that's and the extraction of the sugar. That makes sense.
So the analogy that I use there for wine people is imagine not using a bladder press to crush.
Right.
Where like if you use something that's more industrial, the skins break early, the wine starts to oxidize, and by the time you make the wine, the juice has already been exposed to the air because you used some big modern piece of equipment that was basically shredding all your skins too early, and you have like a shit table wine at that point.
Exactly. It's like the more you process, obviously, at the end of the day, you're gonna have.
All right. So can I run something by you and tell me if I'm on? This is. I want you to correct me if I'm not correct here. When I talk about the importance of the word 100% agave on the label, I usually go back and I talk about Patron, and I say when Patron launched, the reason it was such a big deal is because it said 100% agave, and they weren't using mixto. They weren't blending in grain alcohol or lesser alcohols to cut the tequila. It was like single malt versus blended whiskey. And once people got the idea in their mind that 100% agave made the difference, that's when there was no going back. So today, nobody ever wants to put mixto or not 100% agave. Almost 100% agave. Nobody wants that on their label because they know that the consumer won't accept that, having the new standard be 100% blue agave, nothing else added. The problem that they don't understand is that there are all sorts of ways to use 100% blue agave, like with a machine called a diffuser that sprays an agave with hot water, pulls out the starch. The starch water is converted into sugar with an enzyme, and that is fermented and distilled, which is basically like taking the shitty water after you've boiled your Brussels sprouts, adding an enzyme to it, and like cooking and fermenting that. It's like the bath water that's being distilled, but yet it's 100% agave.
Yeah.
Is that correct, if I say that?
Somewhat to an extent, yes, it is correct. So,
okay.
Like we were talking about, so we've already waited like 7 to 10 years to fully harvest the agaves. When you're using a traditional method of like the whole processing of tequila, once it gets to the distillery, it takes about anywhere between 7 to 10 days to fully, process and make tequila. Using a diffuser, once it arrives at the distillery, you can make tequila in 24 hours.
Oh wow!
But there's 2 different types of diffusers. So essentially, there's a diffuser where the diffuser like machine is like similar, and that essentially what it does is once you shred the fibers. It uses steam pressure again to extract all of the sugar from it. But sometimes they use sulfuric acid, not a lot of them. But what they do is they cook all of this, like you were saying, like dirty, vegetable water. They cook it as much. That's how they hydrolyze it essentially. But the 2 ways is you can actually shred green agaves first, and then process it that way, and then cook it, which. That's, to me, it's fascinating how technology has advanced so much. But
have you seen one before? Because I've only seen diagrams or videos. I've never actually seen one. You've seen one in action?
I haven't seen it in action. I've seen it in person. They're huge, and there's different steps to it, and it looks like you're going into a processing plant essentially. Right. Like when you go to different distilleries, like you can see how the traditional ones. It's like. There's something romantic about it. Like it's just so beautiful to see people working, and there's so many different steps, and it's elaborate. But when this method, it looks very industrial. So agaves, the one way is shredding green agaves. then using steam, pressure, hot water, and then once you extract all that, like the carbs or whatever, the inulin essentially, you can make that dirty or that water, heat it up, and that's how you start, doing that hydrolysis, turning all the sugars, and then you ferment it. The other way, some other distillers will actually use autoclaves or cook in traditional ovens and then go through that process. So
right.
It just depends. But
so the resulting spirit, though, that comes out of that is basically neutral, right? It doesn't taste like anything, or it's like vodka.
It is more neutral. Some people have called it agave vodka.
Right.
But it's one of the most controversial steps, especially with like the tequila, aficionados and all the people that are really into the industry for many reasons. And we can talk about the biodiversity of the plant and using younger agaves and all that stuff. But it does produce less of a complex spirit at the end, and then they do add sometimes a little bit more additives towards the end to kind of.
Right, because they have to put the flavor back in. They've extracted all the flavor out of the tequila. This is sort of like what people talk about Monsanto or like other GMOs, where this agriculture lacks any real flavor. So they add the flavor that we expect to taste in these products back in, right, with like food additives and food flavorings.
And I think there's a bigger issue to it. Not issue, but just like more conversations to talk about, like that. Around the industry, the denomination origin of spirit of tequila and the laws and the regulations, how it's allowed to do, like you said, like a blended tequila. So there's tequila, right. There's 100% agave tequila. And like, I don't know any other spirit that does like a blend of, other than but whiskey does different types of like grains and whatever. But it's just fascinating too that you can add like, sugarcane alcohol, molasses alcohol, sugar beet alcohol, and then blend it with agave, and make a tequila essentially. But I think that's just one thing. But there's a lot more. There's a huge agave shortage, and there's this whole denomination area, which I know that's where the agaves grow, which is causing some issues as well with the biodiversity of the plants. So there's just so many different things to talk about and issues that are it's not just about the processing. Maybe it would be better for some of these producers if there was a larger. The regulations weren't as strict, but I don't know.
Right.
There's just more to know about that.
I think for me, the problem that I have is the price. Like, this is a free society. You can make whatever you want in the capitalist market. You can sell whatever you want to sell. But the analogy that I used on a blog not that long ago was like hot Cheetos, right? I like hot Cheetos. They're terrible for me. They are made from cornstarch and, peanut oil. None of the flavors come from anything related to cheese or anything hot. And I'm aware of that. And as long as it costs me like $1.99 for a bag of hot Cheetos, that's my choice. If hot Cheetos were $100 a bag, I would say, oh, why? And that's sort of what's happening with tequila. There's a lot of $100 bottles of tequila that are made like hot Cheetos.
Yeah.
And so I have to ask, what are we paying for? Like, what's in it? It's a processed tequila that, was made very efficiently from the cheapest methods possible. It's loaded with sugar. It's loaded with additives. The flavors aren't real. Why is it $100? And that's the conversation nobody wants to have. So then you got to show them something like El Tesoro or Tapatio or Ocho or the other tequilas that are made at the distillery, and talk about Carlos Camarena and talk about like waiting 7 to 10 years for agaves to ripen and sugar and old school process, and it freaks people out. It would be like if you told them that their $150 bottle of Dom Perignon was actually just the stems and the seeds and the shit that fell out of the vat that they found a way to like turn into alcohol, and then they injected it with like bubbles and added a bunch of flavor, and people would lose their minds if they found that out. And yet nobody's really freaking out about their tequila. And why do you think that is? Do you think it's just that people don't know?
It's like, I think it's fascinating because a lot of people don't really understand how tequila is made.
Right.
Like, people still think the agave is a cactus or whatever, so, they don't understand the length of time it takes to actually process, grow and harvest agave, it's 7 to 10 years. to grow the plant. People don't really realize that, and I think there's a lot of people that are becoming more educated now and learning a little bit about more of that. But I think it also has a lot to do with just the American culture and how it started with tequila, and it became this, especially in America, it became this like party spirit and like shot spirit, and we had some of the bigger brands kind of really focusing on that, and and because of the plant being so, taking so long and economic shortages, they had to figure out a way to continue to produce to supply for the demand that they were getting. So, which is why a lot of people introduced, more, industrial ways of making tequila to keep up with those norms. But I think a lot of it, like I said, has a lot to do with, we still need to do a lot more education about the tequila and how it's made, and how much labor goes into it. And I think people need to understand and realize and taste the different tequilas. I don't think I've ever had anybody like taste El Tesoro or a very traditional style tequila and compare it to the other one, they'd be like, holy crap, that's not good. People love El Tesoro,
But you know what happens? To be honest, this happened today, and I'm only bringing it up because it was like 30 minutes ago in the store. I had given them a bottle of El Tesoro, and he came back and he was happy with it. He wasn't like upset, but he was like, "Do you have anything smoother?" And I'm like, "No, not in the style that we discussed."
Yeah.
I was like, "Why do you think it's so smooth?" He's like, "Sugar, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, I mean that's why." I mean,
I just had a conversation earlier today with a friend of mine, just saying and I think the American palate tends to like a little bit sweeter things, and they want to make it taste like. Carlos, perfect example, talks about what this whole thing is like. Sometimes people will ask him like, they'll taste off the store, like, oh, this is like, it tastes like it's strong, or it's like really, and then like, well, yeah, it's tequila, it should have a certain taste. But there's a lot of people that actually like it because it's rich in flavor.
Right.
Because if you don't like that flavor, then go drink something else that has no flavor and add your flavor. Like,
yeah, I know, but they don't want to be seen that way. I mean, this is going back to that thing that whenever anybody says they want something dry, you almost can't believe them.
Yeah.
You have to do the opposite. It's like when you see people go to the farmer's market and they get a no hormones free range chicken, and it's like a tiny shriveled bird, and they're like, what the fuck is this? And it's like, that's what chicken looks like when it's not pumped full of steroids and all sorts of other things,
Exactly.
and like kept in a coop. It doesn't get all fat and luscious and, perfectly plump.
Exactly. But in my opinion, I think the traditional styles and like things like that are non-processed, I think have so much more richness and character and flavor. And I think, just the consumer likes see things and they want to be used to something over and over and over, and I think that's that's just more of like a people, and we can't really change that. But I think what's important for us, I think I think in my role is to talk about like the larger role of like agaves and how really drinking a lot of these tequilas, I think I enjoy traditional tequilas, and I think it's like talking to them about how it's made and understanding that. And I think once we do that, people will understand and like really do understand how it's, the reason why it tastes, so maybe it's strong or it has a strong character or flavor, but it's a good flavor, So I think it's just more and more conversations about that.
I think the Matrix sums it up, right? Like, you get out of the Matrix because you realize you're being controlled by robots, and you're like, oh, dude, I don't want these robots controlling me. Yeah, pull me out of the Matrix. And then you realize that like life outside the Matrix is hard, and you want to just go back in and just like like Joe Pantoliano's character is just like, plug me back in, right? Put me back into the Matrix. I don't care if this isn't really steak, and if my brain is just telling me that it's steak, because I just want steak to taste like what I remember steak tasting like. And, we're going to have a Matrix moment, I think, with some of our tequila customers in the future. Yeah.
But I think a lot of people are actually kind of, in my experience and when I've been doing tastings especially, I think people tend to, once we talk about the process and like the, all the different types, and when they taste things like traditional style tequila, and so far we've had great like responses, and I think that's encouraging to me because people, I think once you learn about it, and just like with everything, once you really learn and are open to, that, then it really we can change it by that way. So.
All right, well, I'm on board. Just like let me know what else I can do besides one customer at a time. Thanks for doing this today. This is like right at a half an hour where I'm trying to keep these, so this is perfect.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for having me, and guys, and hopefully, if you need anything else, let us know.
I will. Hopefully, I'll see you down there again some point when we can travel again.
For sure.
All right. Bye, Louise.